Okay, somewhere, someone is good enough at Blender or SFM technology that you can make a, not Unicron, but you can make a transforming Omicron. You gotta do it. It's gotta be done. It doesn't already exist. And then like it fights like Fauci or something, or bashes the earth or something, you know, it's the Umicron, you know. Anyway, so now was in National Pulse, I just saw 95% of Omicron cases are people who are considered vaxxed, even though that's now a arbitrary measurement depending upon the week or the month, if you've gotten your booster or not, and all that business. So I just wanted to make this video because I didn't really understand that. Like, I knew people kept bringing stuff up about Scott Adams. I didn't know what it was, because there's some people that I like them, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to, like, I don't want to see people harsh like the Chad or something like that, none of that business, But Scott Adams is who confirmed to me, actually, that my understanding of what was going on was going to pan out, and that this was going to be a mostly ersatz, that we would just simply record the data so badly, or we would keep the data hidden so much because it's the Biden administration, which is an extension of the Obama administration, and that means the Democrats get to openly lie to us. And then when we find out about it, because of squirrel levels of memory about things, that nothing will be done and nobody will be punished, or that the press would go out of its way just simply to not talk about punishment for such medical deviance and legal deviance. So Scott Adams made me understand, like, okay, I know what the PCR tests are for. Like, immediately I was like, PCR, because the first thing you said, the testing, and we have these PCR tests. I'm like, PCR tests aren't what you use. PCR tests are a relatively accurate test for, I think it's like, that's the Elizabeth Warren, 1 in 1,024th, it's what, all the genetics companies were using. Now, that was something that, because of a lot of information I had garnered watching both the left and the right, knowing the left from my upbringing, but then also really understanding from the beginning what Obamacare would require. It would require a way of constantly monitoring people and their health outcomes. Which, I kind of would understand if it were like Star Trek and you could just lie on something, be like bing bong, and you would have all these levels. And I think people were thinking of it like that. I think like people were kind of thinking like, no, that's what it'll be like. It'll be like the Star Trek medical facility, and there'll be just instruments that you pass over the body, and you'll just know stuff. And there were even ads and articles about such technologies coming in, like things that would actually kind of chemically sniff the body to see, okay, there's certain chemicals given off in pheromones and hormones and this whatever that you could detect if the person is starting to have these issues, because their body's giving off a chemical signal, really. Chemosensitive technologies. So there were a variety of these things. I had put aside in my mind, okay, so that's the next wave of technology, and that there's a certain legal infrastructure. And so the deal with Obamacare is it was laying out that legal infrastructure, and poorly, very, very, very poorly, because you needed what's called data-driven medicine. And that data is genetics, a genetic library. And that industry is called genomics, and that's the Human Genome Project. One of the key problems with this is this was something brought up by people on the right before Trump even popped up. So this is a realm of the internet that even, like, probably Scott Adams would see this person citing papers, but they could see what this is really about is race and IQ, and it's like, oh, that's kind of distasteful, so they didn't want to hear about it. You know, that wasn't their interest. But a lot of people on the right were like, wait a second, you mean that the preponderance of scientific evidence is this, and this? This is actually being well recorded, but we're not acting on this absolute data that we have to deal with. That seems to and everybody's very uncomfortable about discussing it. And so that was a big part of the IQ and race thing. Is that there's going to be groups of people that they will have to assort along those lines for probably about another 100 years before you get those like the brightest of the bunch having 2 generations of kids who also assort with the brightest of the bunch over and over and over again. So it becomes like these genes spread in some community. Now, the beauty of it is there's evidence this is starting to happen, and it's because of capitalism, that it's actually rewarding across the urbanized parts of Africa people who perform highly, and the cities cause that assortment everywhere. Rome did, in Persia, the cities caused that assortment. And so one of the things that I was surprised from Scott Adams to hear was his thing about don't do the I'm right thing, yada yada yada. And I'm like, wait, but Scott's who made me understand I was going to be proven right, because the tool being used couldn't be correct if the measurement tool was not the correct measurement tool, such as the PCR test. The PCR test is not the right measurement tool. It never was. This was not just admitted by the creator of the PCR test. This eventually was admitted by the World Health Organization, and I think recently the NIH. They're like, this is not a test to see if somebody is already exposed and now immune. This is if somebody simply at some point has come in contact with the DNA of it. I'm sure you've heard this argument, but it was a much bigger deal than I think people get. And I suggest people look up, just put the word genomics in the search window in Facebook. Just see what this is a huge industry. Recently, the big deal is that Microsoft Genomics, a program that had venture capital put together via something called the M12 Venture Capital Program, and I think it might have been called M12VC, MVC, but it was Microsoft Venture Capital. The head of Microsoft Venture Capital is a former Qualcomm guy, so he's a former CIA guy, obviously. And then what this is, in my view, is a race to form libraries of genetic data. So it's like how YouTube got this library of stuff that people fundamentally volunteered, and then it got tanked by a Democratic activist who just simply can run she can run the company into the ground and nobody cares, because the whole point is at some point to have an infrastructure for just simply putting on mostly, the standard, alphabet letter news broadcasters or whatever, and then a wide variety of movie rentals from, and so because they would have this large library of all kinds of rare stuff that people had uploaded, then it's even more lucrative for them. So to cheat everybody out of ad revenue and to hide the numbers on how that revenue is paid out, and and to have terms of service that you supposedly violate, and suddenly you can't get any of your money, and she's running into the ground. It's an untrustworthy company, and it couldn't be rewarded in a market that really was legit, and yeah, so so the PCR tests were, because if you knew what they were never accurate, and that antibody tests were dismissed as even a method, and that's it. That was how I knew something stunk from the very beginning. You told me this. You told me that you can't solve a problem until you have metrics. You're the one who said you can't solve a problem until you have metrics. You could debate about the metrics, but you can't solve the problem until you have metrics, no matter what, and everything else aside of that. So I was like, okay, that's a great, simple kind of way of doing this. So what metrics did we have? We had, at best, the lies from the Ministry of Truth of Albonia. Even the World Health Organization is still contiguously begging China, please give us samples from people who contracted the virus at the source, at the infection point where this all began. Never got them. YouTube kicked Stefan Molyneux because he got a group of independent genius-ass scientists mapped the gene, mapped the virus, had a visual, even described the spiked proteins and everything. It was a wonderful series of videos, and his channel got yeeted. That's what was really going on. All of this kind of stuff started, okay, so nobody's supposed to be exposed to any real metrics on this. Anybody who brings up good, solid metrics gets yeeted. We're only supposed to listen to these various FCC-approved outlets and nothing else. And there's a big problem now that the young right is going to have with the old right. They're like, how did you not understand this? How did you not get this already? Like, they do this constantly. This is who they are. This is what they are. They do this constantly until they know that we're going to stare them right in the eye and go, I think you're bullshitting me. They just keep doing it. So, I just wanted to put that out because I'm not like mad at Scott Adams. I'm just sitting back like, you had to have known the PCR tests were being used, that's what they were using, and that these are not what you would use to know if people had been infected. You would have to have blood drawn, and you would want to culture antibodies. This should have been by the first year. This should have happened. By the first year, this should have happened. The numbers of people just falling out and dying in the streets we saw in China on all those videos. That, remember, everybody said China said it was a giant hoax, and it was because of all the right-wing racists. Remember, at every stage of this, very important part of this. I remember when everybody was still talking about this a general in Iraq who got killed by our drones. And I kept asking people, are you hearing about this strange virus supposedly putting people out in China? Everyone's like, no. I'm like, you're not seeing this? And people are like, no, what are you talking about? There's a virus in China. if people are dying in the streets. I'm like, none of this is coming up on your feeds. And that came out of our end of the internet. We were the ones who were putting together all of this footage coming in from cell phones, all this footage that was popping up on Weibo, and then before it would get yeeted from Weibo, and that came out. And remember, this was a conspiracy meant to say horrible things about the Chinese people that was coming out of the far right wing of the internet. That's how this story starts. So we were on the metrics by March. We were on the metrics by March and in April, and by May, now we already have a map of the virus. On YouTube, we're actually keeping track of, like, that China is locking this many people down here, China was locking that many people down there. And before, people were still saying, I think into April, that it was a kind of a conspiracy of the right, saying these horrible things about China. And all over the internet, there was these people trying to figure out how to shill or weave the story one way or another. And they've popped up again. Like there's these supposedly these internet and Twitter doctors who will pop up now and then. And it's like, oh, where'd this person go? Oh, they went to this country for a year. Got it. Okay. And they got out of the country. They went on vacation for a year or something like that. Eric Dinkelfein. What was it? Dunfeigel or something? The famous not really a doctor or something like that of Twitter. Who pops up on CNN as some kind of specialist in this information field. So, yeah, you pointed out, if you see somebody trying to solve a problem with the wrong measurement device, most likely the problem cannot be solved. They won't solve it. They might even exacerbate it because they're using the wrong device to get metrics. And then the metrics are terrible. And they're haphazard, they're arbitrary, you won't know what you even have metrics really for. And now, what I think the metrics are for is an entirely different issue. That's my theory. This theory has also sort of been proven out recently because there's been a recent acquisition that's happened by a venture between George Soros and some of his funding, his financial organizations and his nonprofits and such, and Microsoft to purchase one of the largest testing companies. So Microsoft Azure is a very fascinating tool that I'm sure Scott Adams has used Azure when he's made spreadsheets, unless he's an Apple guy, and he probably is an Apple guy. That it is higher level, but I wouldn't, maybe Azure is used on Apple spreadsheets, but I figure it's only Microsoft. But you could use Azure, and you could analyze language said about a company or a stock, and it will fundamentally do this, that'll analyze whether this is language that is it'll get the connotation, it'll analyze the connotation. There's actually a viewer here who I had a little discussion about Azure with, or two viewers I had a discussion about Microsoft Azure with. And one of them actually works in cloud computing, and it was kind of getting me to understand the nature of Microsoft Azure. And so that is advertised in this new package of industries: Face2Gene, Eagle Genomics, the Wuji app, that there's a big part of this has to do with physiognometrics and actual apps that doctors can use, and they are using, for severe deviations, genetic deviations that you would see through physiognometrics. And they're using this computer, the Microsoft Genomics and Azure, in this package that these it looked like about 9 companies on that page, as I recall. I think some of them have merged a bit, or they've changed names, or have gone under other funding. Maybe are on their own, because there were more of them before. Oh, that's what it was. Not Eagle Genomics. With Microsoft Genomics, there's definitely Wuji app. Face2Gene. Actually, Face2Gene, I think, even has an app you can download for a physiognometric library being assembled on Microsoft Azure at Microsoft. And then there's, what was it? Sophia Genomics. That's the one. Microsoft Genomics sponsored Sophia Genomics. So most of this is an effort to establish a free library that people just give for a genomic industry that's yet to become a part of data-driven medicine from universal healthcare. Because the only way you could really start to, you have to understand what is now also, the social media part of it is the psychometrics. So how do you motivate very specific, there's certain healthcare kind of considerations that we just know they work in the they work among mammals. It's, less food and fundamentally making them walk. When you do that to mammals, they're going to actually lose weight typically, but also oddly enough, they start to have slightly better health outcomes than if they were doing the opposite. And we know this with humans, that even the ancient armies were run on like gruel, and yet they were incredibly fierce. And so you have to have some understanding of why are there people who they have these allergies? Why are there... Now, my big thing is seeing what social media has done. And I have to do this because I have to think it's going to go horribly wrong or be used in some way that's nefarious. Because just the nature of the way I think through this is all this kind of stuff is going to be used really to match the psychometrics from social media. How much did this person drink? How many times were they at this pub taking pictures of themselves? What was this person's sexual activities? Remember, these apps are on the phone, and they are very likely able to constantly ping information back, like where you actually are. It'll ask you if you want to befriend somebody who they know you are in proximity to frequently. In everything that I've researched from this says that it's more that there's actually a type of assembly of information happening that is now complete with genetics, that for about almost 20 years people have given what would be psychometric data to these various companies via social media. Then they have the types that you actually have, like TikTok and that we know there's a lot of psychometric data being garnered from that. We try not to act like Facebook is not doing this too. YouTube as well. That we know YouTube admittedly does this. That YouTube will actually look through who you like as far as media, and will actually start to do the whole thing of let's fiddle with your actual network of information so that we could get certain outcomes, and see if we could quote unquote de-radicalize you. To me, that's what this is. That idea it's because that would be good engineering in the sense of engineering a society. If I know that's what these tools could be used for. That is when I'm looking at the preponderance of evidence and being like, this kind of looks like that's what it is. But definitely this idea of we were right, you were wrong, this kind of thing, that doesn't, to me, I think it's more that I don't think you understood how well you taught people who follow you. That you actually taught me to look at, well, the measuring device they're using is not accurate at its fundamental basis. How do they know these things then? Where are they getting this information? Who's even assembling it? And then there's actually this beyond it. There's been so many stories that kind of panned, that I'm like, oh, okay, this really has panned out, that I was right about this. But the one that really actually blew me away, and it was sad because it made so much sense. It's so human, so Andromeda strain, that at a certain point, Willamette Weekly actually had to, they did it as, breathless crisis writing. But it really was that they simply did not have any way of, they had no universal way of getting the data on who got tested, where they got tested, and when. Then did they seek any kind of treatment, and what kind of treatment did they seek, like in the state of Oregon? And this is a story, it pops up in some feed, and then the story vanishes. And so I'm like, okay, so we actually don't have accurate numbers on who received what treatment. That's not good. Like that's a total failure. Then NPR has a story around the same time, but a little before then, about how the control groups, and I mean that all these companies have admitted they all messed up the control groups, that they injected the control groups with the vaccine. So we never had a control group. And I thought it was fascinating that this came up on NPR of any outlet. I was a little surprised by that. But so NPR admits then we don't have a control group anymore. So we don't have regional norms for compiling the data. Then we don't have testing measures that are within what looks like 50% accurate at this stage, that they're lower than 50% accurate. We refuse to test for people, for the portion of the society that is immune. And then when they're immune, suddenly the absolute rules about viral contagion fly out the window, and they still have to be vaxxed. And then we keep finding that people who have gotten vaxxed, not only are that we might be underreporting side effects, but also we might be under or possibly far over-reporting how many people have been now quote-unquote vaxxed by a measurement that has changed. The standards of the measurement have been altered within a very short while. And so if you're even altering the metrics methodology in the midst of the experiment, it starts to lose most of its credibility totally and completely and damn fast. And really, that's now sort of one of the things I didn't really understand. Like, Scott, how did you not know all this? Like, and put it together as well. It can't be as effective as they're saying, because we have all these holes in the method by which we would even record the data. And it's not hate. I really am kind of glad that I listened to an engineer and didn't get the jab.